Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's UKAA webinar. Just going to kick off as we've got a reasonable number of people joined us. My name is Dave Butler, as you know, you can see it on the screen. I'm joined today by Nikki Dorman and Deborah Udolph live from Hyperoptic and SAY Consulting respectively. It's an interesting session today. We're going to first of all run a video of a discussion on the impact of COVID-19 on a full fibre network. That's going to run for 40 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and have a live Q&A. So, welcome again. I'd encourage everybody to send in questions using the Q&A button. We'll pick up those at the end of the video. This is probably, I think this is the third or fourth video webinar we've run in July. We've got a lot more coming up, all available on the UKAA events page. So just to let you know, this is being recorded. I think it's a recording of a recording. And anyway, so let's kick off right now. We'll just get the video going and then we'll come back at the end of it. Okay, welcome.
Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. Over the next 45 minutes, we are going to be discussing the impact COVID-19 has had on a full fibre broadband network. Has it stressed the network? Have we faced serious challenges? How have we reacted to those challenges? What's been done? And then we're going to move on and we're going to look at the future of connectivity. Has COVID-19 changed that future? Is the demand of connectivity in the home going to be even greater? And how is the real estate industry going to react to that and respond to that? My name is Nikki Dorman, and I am Head of Build to Rent at Hyperoptic. And I'm going to be your host for the next 45 minutes. Now, we have been delighted with the response to this webinar. It is obviously a very important topic right now. And so because of the volume of numbers of guests that we have attending today, we are going to be putting you all automatically on mute and your cameras will be switched off. However, this session has been designed to be interactive. And I really hope and encourage you all to please do ask us questions. It's easy to do. There's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. So all you need to do is write in your questions. They will come to me and I will put them to our panel. Now, if we don't have a chance to get to all of your questions, please be rest assured that we will answer all of them. And after this webinar, we will be sending out a communication to all of you, which will include the answers to your questions, a video recording of this webinar, and also a survey which we really hope you'll fill out, because we hope this is going to be the start of a number of webinars that we do. So please do that. I am now going to take you through the agenda quickly so that you can see what it is that we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to start off hearing from Hyperoptic, and we're going to be learning about what trends have changed in internet usage and traffic since COVID-19 started. And then we're going to move on and look to the future of what how COVID-19 has impacted the network, and also what is going to be new in the future, and how do buildings, the real estate industry, how do they need to respond? Is the invisible world of digital infrastructure going to become much more important? And are we going to see a far stronger relationship between digital infrastructure and the property industry? It's going to be really interesting. I think I'm now back on, and I was about to introduce to you our panelists, our guests for today. And I'd like to start by introducing my colleague, Tony Mitchell from Hyperoptic. Tony is our Network Operations Director. Hello, Tony. Thank you for your time. Please do turn on your video camera so that everyone can see who you are.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join you.
Thank you, Tony. And as always, delighted to be in the company of Deborah Udolph. Deborah is a partner at SAY Consulting. SAY Consulting are experts in the field of property, building, design, operations, how buildings are run. And I'm delighted to have Deborah on the panel with us today. Thank you for your time, Deborah.
Thank you, Nikki. Lovely to see you.
And I'm also delighted to have on board today Henry Pethybridge. Henry is a director at WiredScore, and WiredScore have been making a big impact in the market in the last few years. And WiredScore rate the digital connectivity performance in buildings. So thank you everyone very much for your time today. I'd like you to ask Deborah and Henry to please turn off your cameras and put yourselves on mute. And I would now like to hand over to Tony Mitchell from Hyperoptic. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much. My name's Tony Mitchell. I'm director here in Hyperoptic, and I'm responsible for the management of the network platform. That means it's my job to manage the traffic across our platform. Let me just introduce myself in a bit more detail first. I've been here at Hyperoptic for 3 years. Prior to that, I worked with a company called OpenReach, a company that many of you may be aware of. In OpenReach, I was accountable for the operational management of their FTTC product, which is their fibre copper hybrid access broadband product. Prior to that, I worked with British Telecom Group, and part of my job was to design and develop BT Group's copper broadband portfolio. Prior to that, I worked with an American business called AT&T. I ran their worldwide IP network. And prior to that, I worked with an American company called MCI in Northern Virginia, where I was responsible for MCI's international build platform. In MCI, I was not involved in broadband. In those days, broadband did not really exist. I've been in this industry for 33 years. I'm an industry veteran. So that's me. That's Tony Mitchell. That's the platform director for Hyperoptic. What I hope to demonstrate in the next 10, 15 minutes is how our network platform and how our traffic management capability has managed in the COVID-19 environment. I've got 2 slides to help me do that. I'm going to run through one slide, which is our transport architecture and topology, and then I'll run through one slide with specific examples on our specific traffic management. And what I hope to demonstrate to you is that if you were to choose Hyperoptic broadband, you can be assured that you'll be choosing a technology that's future-proofed, and you'll also be choosing a business that's very experienced in full fibre broadband, and you would be in good hands with that business, with that experience. So first of all, as I said, just looking at the topology here, as you go from the right through to the left, what you see on the right hand side is multiple dwelling units, customer buildings. Moving to the left, you've got the access network, the aggregation where we pull traffic into exchanges, a backbone where we switch traffic around the United Kingdom. and then the data centres where we subsequently hand traffic over. You may look at that and think most any carrier or ISP in the UK could show a similar topology. And that's true. Most any carrier or ISP in the UK could show a similar topology, but they couldn't show you the same topology. One of the capabilities of Hyperoptic is our access network. Our access network is full fibre. And our full fibre access network has been built over a 10-year period of time. There's lots of broadband opportunities and choices out there, primarily looking at fibre copper hybrids, looking at different types of technology, coax that seek to deliver more speed over copper. There's lots of opportunities, there's lots of choices, but it's Hyperoptic that is focused on full fibre, and we've been doing that for 10 years. So you might think, okay, 10 years, there are broadband businesses out there that have been operating in the UK market that have a rich legacy of almost 100 years. But our response to that is that fibre is a relatively new technology. Full fibre is something that we focused on, and having 10 years experience in full fibre gives us a core competence in the management of broadband. I'm not trying to suggest that people in Hyperoptic are all superhuman beings and that people in Hyperoptic are all perfect. But what I am saying is the more you focus on something, the more you practice on something, the better you get at it. You can read articles in the Harvard Business Review on academic subjects, on statistical process control, on Taylorism, on production efficiency. It all comes down to the fact that if you focus on something and build experience, then you're going to get better at it and better at it and better at it. So my conclusion on this particular slide then is, this is a Hyperoptic architecture, this is our topology. It's very similar to what you could see in a UK carrier or ISP, but we distinguish ourselves in our access layer because we're full fibre, we're future-proofed, we've got significant experience, and what that means is we can deliver a strong performance, even in the most challenging of circumstances. And indeed, the current environment have created very challenging circumstances for most everyone that lives here in the United Kingdom. So on the second slide then that I wanted to show you, which refers to our traffic profile, I just want to talk through this for a moment. Clearly you can see in the middle there's a traffic peak. Traffic managers are very interested in traffic peaks. As COVID-19 started entering the UK, and it was clear that people would have to work from home, schools would close, there was a lot of concentration on, can transport providers manage peaks? In Hyperoptic, absolutely we can manage peaks. We can manage peaks because a platform is only as strong as an end-to-end capability. And the end-to-end capability needs to include end-to-end fibre. And it really needs to include fibre in the access layer. Not a mixture of fibre copper, but fibre in the access layer. So we were comfortable that we could manage peaks, and guess what? The peaks have actually grown. We were comfortable on that. The other thing we really focused on was patterns. As traffic managers, peaks are important, so are patterns. As COVID-19 started to develop across Europe, what we did in Hyperoptic is spoke to telecoms companies in Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, Serbia, to find out what they were experiencing. And of course, we learned from them about the challenges of peaks, but also one particular company in Germany helped us understand and anticipate changing patterns. So on the left-hand side of this graph, what you can see on the left-hand side of this graph is a convex profile of traffic. During the day, the traffic profile is pretty high. I could have shown you a slide here prior to COVID, and on the left-hand side, what you would have seen is a traffic profile that was pretty convex. So basically, the pattern of traffic has shifted into the working day, puts new demands onto transport management, new demands onto traffic management, but as you can see, our capability to manage that traffic is absolutely clear. Two other observations on this particular slide. The different traffic profiles are in different colours and different proportions. That all refers to how we hand traffic over into the public internet, in common with other carriers in the UK and ISPs. The other thing I want to highlight in this particular slide here, I explained that traffic managers are interested in peaks. Of course we are. We're also interested in patterns, absolutely, but we're also extremely interested in sharp dips. And here what you can see around about 8 p.m. is a sharp dip. I'm interested to understand if anybody in the audience has figured out what that sharp dip is all about. Have a moment. I'm sure most of you get it by now. The clue is 8 p.m. and the clue is Thursday. That's when people of this country of ours step out of doors for a short period of time to applaud and acknowledge NHS workers and carers that are helping to look after everyone here in the UK. I've got two observations on that. The first one is that dip last week was almost identical to the dip in the first week when clapping for the carers commenced. So the amount of people that are going out onto the streets week on week on week are the same. It's not declining in numbers, it's the same. And our traffic profile is proof positive of that. It's also quite interesting because at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, I've also got to clap and applaud my wife, who's a member of the NHS. I don't think it's often she gets that care and attention from herself. Okay, so that's the second slide that I wanted to run through. And that demonstrates our traffic management. So I hope I've been able to convey to you that here in Hyperoptic, we're a full fibre provider, and that includes the access layer. So that means that we're future-proofed, because fibre transmission media has got the ability to grow and grow and grow way beyond any other physical media. And what I hope I've also demonstrated is that we've got 10 years collective experience in the management of full fibre. So what that means is, if you're planning on choosing Hyperoptic broadband, you can be assured you're choosing a future-proof solution, and you can be assured that you'll be in good, experienced hands. So thank you very much for that opportunity. Happy to take questions later. And also I'm on LinkedIn, happy to take any questions as we go forward. Thank you.
Tony, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. I just have one quick question for you. If our network wasn't a full fibre broadband network, do you feel that there would have been more challenges? Because it's clear that the Hyperoptic full fibre network doesn't seem to have been stressed during the last few months.
Well, two observations on that. About 3 weeks ago, ISP News website had an interesting article on platforms and how they've experienced COVID-19. And it specifically made the point that full fibre operators have more successfully managed pressures in the access layer than operators, for example, that depend either exclusively on copper or mostly on copper. Quite an interesting article. For those that read ISP News, you can search it and come across it. The second point I'd make, of course, is about physical transmission media. Copper is a physical transmission media. It can transmit information, and it can transmit a lot of information. When I work for OpenReach and BT Group and other employers, we use copper extensively. But the physical transmission media of fibre, glass fibre, is completely different. Glass fibre is light years ahead of copper. And that's why the whole industry in the UK is focusing on full fibre and focusing on investing in fibre. But here at Hyperoptic, we've been doing this for 10 years. 10 years. That builds up knowledge, it builds up experience. Sometimes you make mistakes, you study them, you get better and better and better. We're really confident that this is future-proof technology, and we've got experienced hands here.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. That was fantastic. I would now like to move on to the next section of the webinar, and I would like to introduce back onto the panel, back into view, please, Deborah. Deborah Udov from SAY Consulting. Hello, Deborah.
Hello.
I just want to say,
Nikki, you've gone. Sorry, you disappeared for a minute.
am I there now?
Yeah.
Okay. We did some fascinating research into the future of connectivity, and SAY Consulting were very much a part of that research. And actually, all of you who registered today should have received a link to that research. So I'm going to hand over to Deborah Udov now to talk to us about that research. Deborah, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, as everyone knows, I'm Deborah. I'm from SAY Property. And today I am going to be talking about the research paper that you should have all received. It was late in 2019 that we started working with Hyperoptic and the futurologist Tom Cheesewright, who some of you may know. We decided that we should explore the attitude of leaders in the real estate industry into technologies that impact both how we live and how we work. As a business, we advise on how to deliver and operate successful places, and so this topic is really critical to what we do. We published the research in early 2020, and it's really hard to imagine that the world could have changed so fast in such a short period of time. And actually, to prepare for this, when I reread the research, it was sort of quite stark how much has, how the answers could have been so different in the world that we know today. The research was in two parts. The first was undertaken by Tom, who interviewed a number of very senior figures in the real estate industry to understand how their businesses were tackling the ever-growing challenges of developing and operating buildings in a more demanding technological age. The contributors included British Land, CEOs of British Land, Telford Homes, Notting Hill, Argent, as well as William Newton and Henry Petheridge from WiredScore, and I'm going to be talking to Henry after this. The paper can't really do justice to the insight that Tom gathered through his interviews, but it certainly gives a flavour of the conversations that took place. The contributors gave Tom some real food for thought and insight, as well as being very honest about their concerns for the sector and its need to modernise. We found that there was certainly an enthusiasm for the adoption of new technology, but real caution because of a lack of clarity on cost and added value. It was recognised that customers' demands were driving investment both in the residential and commercial sectors, rather than a strategic proactive approach, as you might expect for something that's so critical and constantly changing. Chris Grigg of British Land was clear that developers must respond to their customers' expectations, and Anna Strongman was concerned how the physical constraints of construction frustrated their ability to implement technology innovation. everyone unilaterally recognised how critically important broadband connectivity is. But there was a lot less clarity on how businesses are making plans, or were making plans, to keep up with ongoing innovation, with perhaps less proactive planning on the implementation of new technologies than you might expect. The business leaders that we spoke to made reference to a chasm in attitudes across the sector, with some developers taking responsibility to provide what customers expected and more, whilst others took no responsibility and felt that it was someone else's problem. The second part of the research was the survey that hopefully some of you took part in. We were looking to establish what people thought about the technology of the past 20 years and the next 20 years. Anyone that's ever run a survey will know it's really hard to get people to respond because we're all completely inundated with requests to reply to things and rate things, even every time we get out of an Uber. Anyway, industry professionals did respond enthusiastically because I think this is a topic that people are genuinely interested in. And we had 228 responses over a very short period of time, and over 50% of the people responded were leaders within their organisations. Firstly, we looked back to understand what the industry felt were the biggest challenges to the real estate sector over the past 20 years. There were 3 key issues raised, but there wasn't one consistent challenge. The 3 were affordability, lack of supply, and making a profit, mainly due to construction costs. These issues are generally inextricably linked because we all know that supply and affordability are affected by construction costs, along with red tape and, of course, policy. But we could also argue that less reticence to adopt new technologies could have made the challenges more extreme, but maybe some of the technologies could actually have helped to resolve the challenges that were highlighted. Interestingly, but perhaps not surprisingly, new technologies and the environment and sustainability barely featured. Most respondents did not consider them to be in the top 3 challenges to the real estate industry in the past 20 years. We then asked respondents to look into the future. Here, there was far less diversity in responses. 61% said that affordability to buyers will be the greatest challenge in the future. However, here, environmental concerns, climate change and sustainability were the second highest concern for the future. But the adoption of new technologies did not feature significantly as a concern. We then asked 2 specific questions about the adoption of new technology. The first was about the use of technology when delivering projects, and the second was about the use of new technologies in the home. 72% of respondents were critical of the industry and its slowness to adopt new technologies for projects. And 62% were critical of the industry's inability to introduce new technologies into the home. That's pretty damning when you consider that these were the views of senior people from within the industry. We then wanted to understand if the ability to use the internet is considered important. Here, there was much more consistent thinking. 66% of respondents felt that the internet was the most important innovation of the past 100 years, followed by the washing machine, surprisingly, and then the television. We also asked what technology excites or scares people, and listening devices such as Alexa managed to excite and scare, a strong indication that there is, oh, my Alexa's just gone off, a strong indication that there is both enthusiasm and fear. What was clear is that there's absolute agreement on the importance of the internet and connectivity, which was obviously a huge relief for us on the basis that we were doing this work for Hyperoptic. It's considered to be the most important innovation, and it's firmly recognised as the 4th utility. What was far less apparent was if the real estate sector is prepared to invest, not just in infrastructure to provide high-speed connectivity that its customers demand, but other new technologies that could significantly change the way places operate. There did not seem to be any recognition that new technologies could be part of the solution to the future challenges, whether they be profitability, affordability, or sustainability. Well, it would be fascinating to rerun those conversations and the survey again today, how different the answers could be. In a world where space will certainly be used differently in the short to medium term, and where all real estate businesses have been forced to embrace new technologies in order to just function. You could argue that more strategic planning and investment could have provided some significant benefits in the current crisis. Or you could argue it could have been a complete waste of time because we could never have planned for an event such as this. What we do know is that the world has changed, and because of COVID, the speed of change is likely to be faster and more critical. Places will be designed differently, and the implementation of new technologies will be critical to both residential and commercial occupation, and therefore their value. We've all been forced to use new technologies. Here we are on a Zoom webinar, crossing our fingers that our broadband won't let us down. But we have to stop considering high-speed broadband as an optional extra. It is the new normal, the fourth utility. We're at a turning point. Conversations about how places operate and technology will never be the same again. Within the space of a few weeks, we're having discussions around remote monitoring, air quality, access control. These have all become commonplace in our work, whereas they weren't maybe 8 weeks ago. We now have a far greater imperative to push forward with greater innovation to accelerate the financial, experiential, and environmental benefits for broader technologies against a backdrop of COVID and the industry's general concern about a lack of clarity on both cost and added value, and a general skepticism about how well the industry has embraced innovation. Thank you.
Deborah, thank you for that. It is a fascinating piece of research, and I would now like to invite Henry onto the panel. Could you turn your... Thank you, Henry. Now, Deborah is going to interview Henry now, and they're going to go back and pick up a few of the points that were raised, some of the key findings that were raised in that research, and they're going to have a discussion now about whether or not those key findings have now shifted. Perhaps they've become even more important since most of our nation has had to move home to work, and how this has shifted the landscape. So I'm going to hand back over to Deborah and Henry. Thanks.
Thank you. Henry, do you just want to explain briefly what WiredScore do?
Yeah, sure. WiredScore is a digital connectivity certification firm. So we rate how well connected buildings are to the internet. We started off in commercial offices, where we've certified buildings in over 10 countries across some of the leading landlords and developers in the world. We launched our residential certification in May of last year. And we're working specifically with the UK build-to-rent market, where we've got over 10,000 units currently committed to that certification.
And can you explain how your rating, particularly of residential buildings, how you think it benefits residents and landlords?
Yeah, so our certification is used to help landlords benchmark the design of their building, to ensure that they're building out best-in-class digital infrastructure in their buildings that can provide for residents' needs both today, but also as conscious of the types of technology that are coming down the line, things like 5G and Internet of Things, to make sure that their buildings are as future-proofed as possible. We also help landlords talk about the connectivity in their building. So using our certification, we have a platinum, gold, silver, certified or uncertified rating, which can help landlords turn kind of all that complex digital infrastructure into something really meaningful that people understand. because connectivity has become such an important part of people's lives. As you were saying, it's like the water and the heating in people's houses. You would never expect to move into a building without running water or without heating. So why should someone expect to move into a property without good quality internet?
And why did you, I mean, we had fantastic response when we asked people to take part in our research and talk to Tom. But why did you in particular want to take part, and how different do you think both your conversation with Tom might be now and other people's post-COVID?
Well, Deborah, to be honest, I was very honoured to be asked to take part in such an illustrious company. But I think Nikki touched on this at the beginning of the conversation. If you'd have asked people 5 or 10 years ago about whose problem the internet was, I think even in commercial real estate and residential real estate, people have said, "Oh, that's the tenant's problem. You know, can I just sell my apartments? Can I just lease my office?" But actually, as time has come on, and particularly you've seen things like the serviced office market coming out and the UK build-to-rent market taking off, what developers and landlords have started to realise is that actually, although this is a service that's being provided into a building, it's actually their reputational risk. Because if something goes wrong with the internet, or if the service isn't high quality, ultimately that's something which is going to impact the resident's experience. And so that responsibility has kind of shifted from it being the tenant's problem to it being the developer or the landlord's problem. But that being said, it's not just the landlord's problem, because the landlord needs to collaborate and work with multiple different stakeholders, the engineering community, the developers, and also the ISPs, you know, companies like Hyperoptic, to be able to provide that service. And so what I thought was really unique about the report was the ability to be able to talk across so many different stakeholders at different parts in the supply chain to come to a kind of industry leading view about kind of what connectivity would look like in the next 5 or 10 years. It was a very well-timed report, but as you say, conversations even now have moved on really, really quickly. And I think that I was speaking to a landlord a couple of months ago who said, you know, even in the last 2 weeks when COVID started hitting people, they'd seen as much digital transformation as they would have done in 6 months or a year. And so I think that pace of change has just accelerated, and people are becoming much more cognizant of the types of technologies in their building.
Yeah, I know when I spoke at the launch of the research, I was sort of rather downbeat about, or frustrated maybe about the industry's lack of sort of enthusiasm for embracing sort of innovation. I mean, we struggle with it quite a lot, with innovation in buildings, or encouraging our clients to use things like BIM. And, you know, I think that, you know, those conversations are definitely going to be very different now. In respect to sort of the differences, you started in commercial and now you're working in residential as well. In respect of the differences in expectations, the differences between commercial and residential, now we're all working from home, and it's likely that this change in some respects will continue. I mean, I think there will be a shift in how we work probably for the long term. How are residential developers going to have to sort of match what's provided in offices, particularly, I mean, not just in connectivity, but also in respect of things like cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting transition. I think the transition between offices and people's homes was kind of happening already. So build-to-rent buildings and we're building basically co-working spaces for people, and still are. And there's this idea that, you know, actually you can work much more flexibly from a building was a really attractive thing to residents. In the same breath, you had companies like Facebook and Google who were provisioning offices which kind of looked a bit more like somebody's house, to try to make sure that people would stay in those buildings for longer. So connectivity aside, this blurring of use cases and asset classes is kind of happening. Then when you kind of talk quite specifically about connectivity, clearly everyone's home has now become their office. And we've all been testing our internet to the absolute extremes. It's for our clients at the moment, I think we've been quite reassured that there haven't been any major issues, and that's in part down to companies like Hyperoptic, who have built kind of quite strong backhauls that are able to deal with the amount of data that we would want to pass through a residential home, which would kind of be similar to what we would want to produce through an office. So definitely we're seeing that blurring. But if you suddenly take a jump and you start thinking about the new technologies that are coming down the line, and I think that's what some developers are doing now, is starting to think, okay, well, if this work from home thing has happened so quickly and video conferencing has happened so quickly, what might be the next trend? And thinking about things like gaming, yes, but also thinking about things like 5G and Internet of Things, and how they might use some of those technologies to manage their buildings in different ways. And I think, Deborah, you actually had a really interesting example about how particularly spaces could be managed through sensors and other places where social distancing needed to be managed in a different way. And I think those are the really interesting things, the conversations which are starting to happen now that the new normal is here. Yeah, I agree. My last question. So I was reading, I think it was yesterday, that a film's just been made about our addiction to screens. It's meant to be a sort of powerful reminder of the negative effects of screen usage. So how can landlords and developers use connectivity, to encourage physical and mental well-being? We've seen quite a lot of this during COVID, where particularly build-to-rent developers have had to be more innovative in how they offer well-being activities and community activities without physically being able to get together. But is this something that you'll consider to include in how you rate buildings? Yeah, it's a really interesting area. My screen time personally has gone through the roof. I kind of hate looking at the screen time app on my iPhone and watching those bars charts climb and climb. Because it's just true. We use the internet now to interact with people, to exercise, and to kind of replace all of the physical interactions that we had. And I think naturally, when there is kind of great progress in technologies, there's normally a counterbalancing argument, which is actually is screen time kind of damaging people's health and well-being. But I think on the flip side, actually, it's highlighted that the internet can be a real power for good in keeping people connected with one another. The idea that physical communities and communities based on proximity has now changed, and actually people are now forming communities online a lot more easily. At WiredScore, we have the WiredScore virtual pub, which opens at 4 o'clock on a Friday and lasts for 2 hours. I wish it opened earlier, but it's just one of the examples of where the internet is being used to enhance people's well-being and to kind of replace those connections which we all so dearly miss. So for me, the internet is actually net a huge benefit to our society, albeit that we do have to watch those screen times and try and make sure those bar charts remain down, and we do end up forming real friendships in the real world when this is all over. Hopefully soon. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Henry. It is a truly fascinating subject, even more fascinating right now. So now because we have actually gone over by close to 10 minutes, I am going to need to bring our webinar session to a close. But on behalf of Hyperoptic and myself, I would like to thank all of you for attending. I hope you found it as interesting as we all have. We've had a fantastic time preparing for this webinar because of the topic is so interesting. And I want to thank the panel very, very much for being involved. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Henry. It's such a pleasure working with you, all of you. Thank you, Tony, as well. And as I said earlier in the beginning of the webinar, we will be communicating to all of you who have been attending today, and we will be sending out the answers to all of your questions. Thank you for those. We'll also be sending a video recording link to the webinar in case anyone missed it. And also we will be sending out a survey, which I would be so grateful for you to fill out, because we are keen for this to be the start of a program of webinars. And also, just finally, we will resend the link to our research, which is entitled Connection to Tomorrow. So that will all be coming out to you probably very early next week. But once again, it's been a fantastic afternoon. Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to now say goodbye. Thank you very much. And we'll see you at the next one.
Good afternoon again, and welcome back. Nikki, that was a fascinating, Nikki and Deborah, that fascinating presentation. As viewers might have noticed, it was recorded a couple of weeks ago. And now we have the chance to ask some questions, Nikki, for a minute. I see we have a question in front of us, but that simply said clap. So whilst I'll applaud the sentiment, I won't. There's not much more I can add to that. Let's see. No, that's done. Okay, so Nikki, perhaps a couple of questions that I have in front of me. Can I ask a slightly technical question? Does full fibre mean bringing fibre within the flats? Nikki, I suspect that's probably your area. I'm picking up on some of the things that Tony was talking about the access layer.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Well, it's an interesting question. It's a good question. And if you're not part of this crazy technical world that we are, it's sometimes hard to get clarity about that. But if I can just take you back to Tony's slide, he did explain that we are absolutely an end-to-end, or that's what it's called, an end-to-end fibre technology. But it really is all about that access layer. So you've got the start is the exchange, and the end is the building. And what's highly important, and what it's all about, the fibre, is in that access layer between those two points, and that is what is called a full fibre network. Inside the apartments, inside the buildings themselves, there are various in-building options, and one of those is absolutely fibre all the way to the apartment, to the home, which is, we are seeing more and more of that kind of design installation coming up.
Okay, no, that's fascinating. And actually, the technical side of it is really interesting. But I think perhaps with the attendees on this webinar, it might be worth just checking on thinking about the things you were talking about, Deborah. You and Henry were talking about how the things will change in the future. Do you have a clear view for what you think how residential developments will impact or change based on COVID-19?
Well, I was thinking while I was watching it, which is just horrible watching yourself, but luckily I was in a very small box. But I was thinking as I was watching it, how even since we did that webinar, which I think is about 6 weeks, when we did it in the sort of height of lockdown, and it was hard to envisage how we were ever going to move away from the place we were at and start to sort of unlock. And obviously we're thankfully in a slightly different situation now, where people are starting to go back to work and to their offices slowly. And also we are able to sort of socialise a bit more, because I think when we did that, we weren't seeing anybody. Mm-hmm. But I think that when we were doing that, we were in this sort of, it was almost like this sort of panic of what do we need in residential buildings? We're never going to be able to press a lift button again, and we're always going to have to socially distance. And I think a few weeks later we realised that's not the case, because if you look at people sitting in restaurants and bars, amenity spaces are opening up in build to rent, and we are within under the right rules and controls, being able to go back to using residential as it was before. But I think that it's highlighted the importance of being able to remotely, sorry, my dog's just come run into the kitchen, that's very good, remotely control, look at how buildings perform is a big thing, I think, and also monitor how many people are in places. So if you do have amenity space, to be able to monitor how they're used and and there's no one here to let the dog out, how they're used, and how we can control access and stop people being too closely together is something that we're looking at a lot. I mean, I think it's interesting, the schemes that we're working on now, there's two real focuses. One is how workspace within residential is designed, because I think that we've all looked at how difficult it is to have a Zoom call if you're sitting in a room with someone else. So designing workspaces and the connectivity of the common areas will be really critical, because actually if everyone is on Zoom, then you need to have really good connectivity. And the other is about how you control things without having to, you know, touch things. If this was to happen again, sorry, I'll put the dog out. If this was to happen again, then how you can let people go in and out of lifts and use CCTV. Yeah. They're the two sort of focuses that we're looking at.
No, I'd agree, Deborah. I mean, I'm not as intimately involved with it as you are, but everything I read and logic says to you that the ability to remotely manage a building is going to be absolutely crucial, remotely monitor. But underpinning all of that is the ability to collect data about it, whether it's people in lifts or whether it's actually how your building is performing. All the stuff that we're looking at there in terms of peaks and troughs so we can measure capacity. Nikki, perhaps I can ask you the same question from Hyperoptic perspective. How do you think things are going to change going forward in design terms?
Well, I think we will see, I think we have to see a slight shift in the relationship between the digital infrastructure, the world of digital infrastructure, and the world of property development and design. I think up until now, you know, yes, it's been important. It's been one of the things that developers have had to think about for sure. But I think that this whole experience has sort of catapulted the absolute importance of that digital capability that companies like Hyperoptic can bring to new schemes, new homes, existing schemes. I mean, you know, and I think that I really hope that there's going to be a closer relationship between the two. I think we need to be talking at a different level. I think that the property industry needs to leverage the ISPs, you know, really start to understand what this all means and what's available, what can be leveraged, what can be designed into buildings. And this is, you know, companies like Hyperoptic are here to absolutely join in those discussions and in that relationship. I think we can educate each other really well. We can really join forces and move forward. So I think that will happen. I think that will happen.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that's one of the things for our viewers. It's one of the things the UKAA is absolutely crucial about. It's absolutely certain about trying to produce best practice, trying to encourage cooperation across the sector. But perhaps both of you, how do we stop people backsliding though? You know, Deborah, you've already mentioned that we started off going to a radical view that everything was going to be online. We've retreated from that to being a mixture. There is that to being slightly pretentious, like Hegelian stuff of thesis, antithesis, and then where does the synthesis come? Where do we find the right balance between those things?
I think what's been interesting in lockdown is how people have used technology to come together, even though it hasn't been physically. And actually probably communities, not just in build to rent, but communities have become stronger despite the sort of physical barriers that have been put in place. So I suppose the hope is that we can continue to use that positively and have sort of personal, you know, one-to-one conversations in a room with someone else, so that that maybe people have embraced the benefit of technology in a good way, and that we can then have some balance with, you know, other things. So I think, you know, the way people have used technology to exercise, to share things, to borrow things, I mean, it's been extraordinary. It's been so fast and so innovative. And if we can just embrace some of that, and I think the other thing is it's been quite intergenerational. It hasn't just been young people that are doing it. And so I think if we can keep that and embrace that, and also perhaps hold on to the idea that change can be quite fast and quite rapid and still successful. Because I think as an industry, one of the things that really came out in the research was this sort of aspiration to embrace it, but a real reticence to do it. And actually a lot of what's been done hasn't cost anything, you know, or not much, you know. I mean, it hasn't been a really, you know, I mean, obviously there has had to be investment in things, but hasn't necessarily been about money. It's been about attitude, and the report really highlighted. I mean, you know, I was a bit despondent, a sort of attitude of, yes, we know it's important, but we're not really thinking about doing anything about it. And I think this has shown that we can have quite fast, radical change, and people can keep up with the change. And so we need to try to, as an industry, I think, embrace that a bit and not just sort of almost go back to the way we were before.
No, we'd hope that there has been a paradigm shift, that sense that everybody suddenly changes and says, well, of course, internet is absolutely necessary. Of course, fast broadband is absolutely necessary. How could you ever think it wasn't? Because I can't imagine living my life any other way. And that is characteristic of fast change, but it is important for people to push that and then push the new paradigm to say, actually, what is the new normal going to be? What is it going to feel like? What do we have to do to reinforce it? Anyway, so enough about me. Nikki, any final words from you?
Yeah, just on that same point, Dave. I think that you know, I obviously agree with everything Deborah has said, and I've also spoken to some people in the industry who have just told me that there have been so many positives out of this, and I hope that we'll see some of those golden nuggets really coming with us into the future, like you know, the community feel, the community efforts that have got people through COVID because of the digital capabilities inside their buildings. I don't see those sorts of initiatives going away. I think it's brought a new life and soul and sense of belonging to those communities, and I believe absolutely that we will take those into the future with us. And also things like, you know, from a business side of things, you know, virtual viewings, more effective digital marketing capabilities have risen up, and I think there's a lot of things that we can take forward, that we will take forward through this. It's been like a masterclass of how to leverage and to appreciate the importance of strong, capable digital connectivity inside buildings. So.
No, absolutely, Nikki. And I think, you know, the word masterclass is absolutely right. And your colleagues gave us a fascinating insight into, you know, how you measure things, how you manage things. And Henry, as ever, speaks very interestingly about what he's trying to do. And Deborah, look, let's start off by finishing by thanking you for your research. I think, as ever, you're at the forefront of thinking in the industry, and it's very much appreciated. It's now 2 minutes to 5, and I think probably it's time to wrap up. I know you said in the video that you'd overrun by 15 minutes, but that was a long time ago. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you to Henry and Tom, who were there beforehand. For everyone, again, thanks for attending. There will be a recording of this, a recording available on our website shortly, and we'll also be sending out all the various documents and links that Nikki mentioned. For those of you who are still in the appetite for webinars, our next webinar is on the 15th of July, when we have Faster Lease Up for a Post-Coronavirus World, presented by Flatfare. And then on the 16th, we've got a really interesting session presented by Marianne Bowering of Ringley on the cladding fund that the government announced and the fact that that's going to close on the 31st of July. So those of us who have cladding problems, and hopefully it's not too many, just a reminder from Marianne about how to navigate our way through that. Once again, then, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Nikki. And Hope everyone's enjoyed it and look forward to talking to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.